Program manager. Program manager. That's right there. Program manager. I can do it. You can do it. Program manager. I don't know why I want to say lead. So we ready to go? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Lieutenant Colonel Keith Marshall, the Garrison Commander here at Fort Greely. Just wanted to come up and say thank you for coming out tonight to talk about our SM-1A project and the first of a series of public meetings that we will be holding and supporting in the next week. So I wanted to come up and introduce our subject matter experts and the program manager, Brenda Barber. She's not a stranger to this community. She's been here multiple times over the last few years. And some may even think she's an actual resident just because of her participation. So, but with that, I will turn it over to Brenda. And thank you so much for coming out here and heading this up for our community. Brenda.
So thank you, sir, for the welcome. As Colonel Marshall said, we want to welcome everyone this evening. I am Brenda Barber. I'm the program manager for the Deactivated Nuclear Power Plant program out of the Baltimore District. So this is a Baltimore District-led project, but we are partnering with Alaska District as part of the implementation for this project. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I've done the introduction. Welcome. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is really, it's an informational meeting. We've been hosting meetings with respect to this project for several years. That information really picked up in the 2018 timeframe, and then again in 2020 when we did our environmental assessment. So we've been in a protracted contract procurement, and now we're ready to implement the project. And so we want to start sharing information about the project and answer any questions or concerns that people may have. I do want to state that this is the first of many public meetings that we will be hosting, because as the project proceeds, there'll be different complexities that we want to address and make sure that we're being very transparent with the community with respect to those issues. So our agenda for this evening, we're going to go over location. I'm going to give a brief history of the project. We'll talk about our regulatory framework with respect to the project. We will discuss all the decommissioning planning that led up to the project that we plan to implement. Then we will talk about waste transportation and radiation safety, and then ways for the public to continue to stay involved in the process. So we are live streaming this on YouTube. So anybody who's online, please drop a chat if you have a question. And then anyone here in the room, if you have a question, feel free to stand up, or there's a mic if you want to go to the mic. You can interrupt me at any time during the presentation so that you can get your comment addressed before we get to the end of the slides. So location and brief history. Obviously, you guys all know where you're at. Obviously, we're at Fort Greely in Delta Junction, approximately 100 miles from Fairbanks. The other locations, Anchorage and Whittier, are of importance to us since that's our primary transportation route, about 328 miles from Anchorage, and then 386 miles from Whittier. So this photo, these photos actually illustrate the affected areas of SM-1A. So the reactor is primarily associated with building 606 here on the post. The north end of the building is the end of the building that was associated with the former reactor operations. The south end of the building is the central heating and power plant that's operated and owned by Doyen and provides all of the utilities for the installation. So one of the first things that we need to do is isolate the south end from the north end so that we could obviously safely implement our project, and Doyen could continue to provide the necessary utilities to the installation. Now, of note, there are also 3 wells associated with the original operation of the reactor. So well 11 is within the fenced perimeter of the site. And then well 12 is within the DLA depot area, and then well 13 is again in the field just near the DLA depot area. So all of those will be decommissioned and dismantled as part of our project, And then the north end of the site will be returned to Fort Greely and Doyen for future use. Next slide. So just some brief operating history. The SM-1A was built here at the installation from 58 to 62. It was constructed as part of a joint effort under the Army Nuclear Power Plant Program. It was a single loop, 20 megawatt pressurized water reactor. We did use highly enriched uranium fuel here, and it generated both electrical power and steam for the installation at the time of its operation. So that was in operation from 62 to 72. And it was primarily built as an in-service test facility to see how a reactor would operate in a remote location. And it is currently the only reactor that's ever built in the state of Alaska. In 1972, the reactor was shut down for the last time, and the Army went into what we call initial deactivation. And we were going to place this facility into safe store. Part of that initial deactivation included removal of all the control rods, all the fuel, and all the liquid radioactive waste was removed from the site. After that was completed, at this particular site, the reactor components were encased to minimize dose to employees who continued to work in the central heating and power plant. So a combination of an AM9 grout and concrete cap were placed in the reactor container vessel, the spent fuel pit, as well as the hot waste tanks. So they're all encased, which again helps to further minimize any potential dose to anyone who is working in these areas.
What are we looking at right at this picture?
So this picture is actually the fuel vault that was in use when the reactor was operational. So because it was fuel that was prepared to go into the reactor, it had to be secure. It had very little to no radioactivity at that time because it hadn't been spent. And so that fuel vault is still in the north end of the plant, and it's been encased and has been permanently closed. So as we discussed, Building 606 is the infrastructure and equipment for all of Doyen for the central heating and power plant. And so we've isolated those operations from our plant, our project, sorry. So here are a couple quick photos. As I discussed, when we were in the planning phase, we quickly realized that there was no safe way for us to implement this project without relocating all of Doyen's infrastructure from the north end of the plant to the south end of the plant, which included not only some of their conventional utility equipment, but also their administrative offices, some of their supplies and admin offices as well. So we worked with the installation as well as with DLA and with Doyen, and we issued a modification to their privatized utility contract. And over a course of 18 months, Doyen moved from the north end of the plant to the south end of the plant. And now the south end of the plant is a standalone facility for Doyen. So there should be no impact or interruption to any of their services that they provide to the installation. Our team did a final audit and inspection of that in May of 2023. And that was really what we considered to be the first phase of our decommissioning effort. So our side of the building, the north end, has been completely segregated from the south end. And then we'll take additional steps to segregate that portions of the building as we move into our next phases. So just a quick timeline, and we really focused here on the post operation timeline. So in 1973, the site was put into safe store, and the Corps of Engineers has safely monitored and maintained the site since that time. And that includes annual monitoring, both from a radiological perspective as well as an environmental perspective. And then we issue annual reports with respect to that monitoring. And to date, there's been no impact from a radiological perspective or an environmental perspective. In the early 2000 timeframe, the Army gave us the mission of beginning to look at what it would take to decommission all of the reactors that were left on the Army's books. This is the third reactor. So plans were put in process. We've done a historical site assessment at Fort Greely. We've done extensive characterization surveys, which resulted in a formal report that was issued. We did do additional efforts again in 19 and 20 to make sure that we had adequate data as we moved into the planning phases of the project. And that allowed us to develop our decommissioning plan, which we are preparing to implement at this time. In 2021, the team finalized an extensive environmental assessment, which resulted in a finding of no significant impact from this project. And that allowed us to present to our regulator all of our formal decommissioning plans. And we were issued our decommissioning permit in May of 2022. As we discussed, we did complete our utilities relocation in 2023. We finalized our award for the contract in 2023 as well. And so we are prepared to start the work. One of the primary risks associated with this project is the encasement material, in so much as there are some potential concerns about the hazardous constituents within that encasement material. So we quickly mobilized the team to Fort Greely in January of this year. And we actually did an entry for a month at the site in January and February to gather additional data and core drilled that encasement material so that we could gather additional data to make sure that we are implementing the project with all the appropriate safety protocols in place. And at this time, we anticipate we will be done in 2029. Okay. So we'll move into our regulatory framework. So we are self-regulated. So we are authorized under the Defense Utilization Facilities, Section 91B of the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. So all of the wastes that are generated from this project are a legacy Department of Energy waste. So we operate under the Army Radiation Safety Program, which is AR 385-10. We have our own set of radiation protection plans and programs. And as we transition into the field later this summer, our contractor will implement their radiation protection plans for the project. All of our permits to both possess the site and to implement the decommissioning are issued by the Army Nuclear and Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Agency. We call them USANCA. So we have those permits, and that regulator does come and visit us on a very, very frequent basis. They were here in January again. They also stand up and host the Army Reactor Council, which brings in additional subject matter experts from the Army to support any regulatory decisions that they need to make. And because we are self-regulated and we don't want to recreate the wheel, we do comply with DOT, the Department of Transportation, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and EPA. So some of the applicable regulations that we have to comply with: the Atomic Energy Act, the National Environmental Protection Act, which is NEPA, which is what drove our environmental assessment. We will be taking a look at the Toxic Substance Control Act, Clean Air, Clean Water, any endangered species that may be applicable here on the installation. And then, as we discussed, our primary regulator is the Army Reactor Office. We have engaged actively with the Alaska State Historic Preservation Office because this site is a historic site and it is on the National Register. We have developed a memorandum of agreement where we will preserve all historic artifacts. There's 7 plaques throughout the facility that are historic importance. And then we're actually going to develop some site markers to leave them both at the installation as well as in Delta to recognize that this was the location of the only reactor within the state of Alaska. We've been coordinating with EPA Region 10 with respect to our waste generation, and then Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation for any local needs that we have from a regulatory perspective. Okay, so we'll move into our planning efforts to date. So as we discussed, we've done extensive characterization of the site that began in 2011. The proposed action under our environmental assessment was to decommission and dismantle the SM-1A in its entirety, which will reduce and remove residual radioactivity, and it will allow us to release the site for unrestricted use here at Fort Greely. The environmental assessment did find, again, no significant impacts from implementation of the project, and actually found that there will be long-term beneficial impacts because we're going to remove the radioactivity associated with the site. As we discussed, we do have a memorandum of agreement with the State Historic Preservation Office, and our final formal decommissioning plan was completed in January of 2022. And I think the important thing to note, this is our third reactor as a team. So I've had the same team on 2 other reactors to date, and we've successfully implemented the decommissioning of the MH-1A, which was a nuclear reactor, on a floating barge. And we are successfully implementing right now the decommissioning of the SM-1 at Fort Belvoir in Virginia, which is the sister plant to this facility. So next slide. Just to give you a highlight of the 2 reactors that this team has worked on actively. The MH-1A was a mobile reactor that was put onto a former Liberty ship, and its primary function and service was in the Panama Canal to provide supplemental power to the Panama Canal. The team actually implemented that project from August of 15 until April of 15, I'm sorry, until August of 18 in Galveston, Texas. We did all that decommissioning work in the Port of Galveston. Once the reactor components were removed, the ship was actually towed to Brownsville, Texas, and we were able to successfully recycle the remaining components associated with that barge. And it was completely completed in March of 2019. Significance is, since we did that work within a port, there were no impacts to water or sediments. We monitored that on a quarterly basis. There was no public exposure to radiological or non-radiological contaminants, again, monitored on a quarterly basis. And we have a very, very strong culture that we developed on that project that resulted in 0 non-compliance with respect to radiation safety. And I think, again, the important thing to note, this was our high-powered mobile reactor. We estimated some doses going into that project, and over the life of that project for our 50 workers on our crew, we received less dose as a team than the allowable public limit in 1 year. So just roughly 28% of the dose that we expected to get. So the team worked very, very hard to minimize dose to our employees and any tenants adjacent to us at the port. And again, 0 dose to the public. So the SM-1 deactivated nuclear power plant at Virginia is the sister plant to this facility. They're pretty much mirror images of each other. We have removed all the reactor components at this site. Just today, all of the above grade components at the site have been removed as of today. So demo above grade is complete. This particular site has extensive soil contamination, so the team's been diligently working on that, and that site's planned to be wrapped up in 2025. To date, we've worked on that project for over 3 years with no safety incidents at the site and no radiological concerns at the site. Again, since we have removed the reactor components, the radioactive portion of this project is primarily done. Our overall expected dose to our workers was about 880 millirem. And to date, all of our crew has received only 309 millirem. So still, again, a significant reduction in what we anticipated. And what we're doing here is bringing all those lessons learned and all that expertise from both those prior projects to Fort Greely. So our approach to this project and what the contractor has been tasked to do is to prepare all the plans to implement the project at this point to ensure compliance with our decommissioning plan and our decommissioning permit. So this includes project management, all the radiological and occupational safety, significant engineering evaluations to go into this project. We will remove all the reactor components, all contaminated soils. Everything will be properly packaged and transported to the lower 48 for disposal. We do a significant amount of in-process radiological surveys, as well as when we're prepared to leave the site, we will do what's called a final status survey, which is the final radiological survey to demonstrate to the regulator that we have achieved unrestricted release for the property. All the buildings associated with the reactor will be completely demolished and removed, and the site will be restored for future use. So one of the key components of the work, and one of the things that was important to our project team, was the ability to work year-round here in Alaska. So the contractor has come up with a very innovative way to allow us to work safely year-round and to provide a tempered environment for us to work in. So we will be installing a very large weather enclosure. It'll be a large tent for the remainder of this year. We hope to mobilize in May and begin construction very soon thereafter. And that tent will provide a cover over the entire north end of the site. And within that tent, we will do all of our waste packaging. We'll keep our equipment inside. We'll do all of our environmental and radiological monitoring, both interior and exterior to the tent. And that'll kind of give us that buffer to keep our employees warm year-round to continue to work. Additional containment will be built within the tent once we begin to actually start removing reactor components. And prior to doing that, we will definitely be coming back and hosting meetings so that you're aware of how that's going to be done and what to be expecting when you see things going on here at the site. Next question. Okay, so really this kind of outlines to you, we do have a very, very robust environmental radiological monitoring plan. So the reddish orange line, at least in my vision, is going to be our site boundary. So we will be installing fencing to make sure that our work area is protected and Doyen's work area is obviously protected as their critical infrastructure here for the installation. And then we will be placing radiological monitoring equipment on that perimeter fence. We will also be doing environmental sampling along the perimeter of the fence, and we also perform air sampling so that we've covered all the medias and modes of transport to ensure that there's no release from the site. And then there is one stormwater location in the corridor area, the road area there. We'll be doing some stormwater sampling there as well. There'll be manned access points into the facility for our team, and those areas will be strictly controlled from a security perspective. Other than our team, only fire and emergency services will have access to those if there were to be an incident during non-working hours. So in addition to the primary site, since it's a very, very small site, we've worked very closely with the Department of Public Works to secure another location here on post to actually build another tent, which is where we'll store all of the waste once it's been packaged and is ready for transport. The primary reason that we're doing this is we do have a very long multimodal transportation route to get this waste to the lower 48. And so some of this will have to be moved in shipping campaigns. And since the site is very constrained, once the materials, the waste is packaged, we want to quickly move it off the site to make sure that we have maximum flexibility in our work area. So there will be another tent built and constructed about a half a mile from the primary site. It will be fenced, secured, and monitored via camera. And then all of the waste will be stored in there, and then it will exit from that to be transported off post. And it will go out to, what is it, Big Robin Road? I think it's the next slide. Maybe? No. Okay. Well, it will go out the primary main gate onto the Richardson Highway. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later on the slides. Once the tent is constructed, we will be prepared as a team to demonstrate to our regulator that we're prepared to implement formal decommissioning, which actually starts with the asbestos abatement at this site. So because of the age of the building, we have asbestos, we have lead-based paint, we have PCBs, we have a lot of universal waste. And we did leave a few items from the utility separation that we need to deal with as well. So that will be our primary effort for the first 3 to 4 months. And the reason we want to do all of the hazardous material abatement first is it minimizes exposure to our employees in the long run, and it minimizes impact to cutting through a wire or pulling a wall down and realizing that there's asbestos behind it. And that's one of our key lessons learned from other projects, because that has happened to us. So we will be doing that in early 2025. And then after that is completed, next slide, we will be moving into what we call materials and equipment removal. So we will start to focus our efforts on removing some of the reactor components that aren't within the encasement material or the vapor containment structure. So on the second floor of Building 606 North, the steam turbine, the generator, the deaerator, which you see here in this picture, we will begin to remove those things and again, make the building more accessible for the future work. And that will be probably within the next 16 months that process will start. And prior to that, we will host additional public meetings, again, to make sure that everyone's involved and aware of what the next steps will be. So moving into waste transportation and radiological safety. Radiation safety, safety in general is the #1 priority for the Corps of Engineers. So there will be minimal risk to the public, to any of the tenants, to the community on Fort Greely from this project. The reactor pressure vessel, as we said, contains no nuclear fuel. So again, no nuclear fuel is left at this site. So really what we have left here is large chunks of activated metal that resulted from the operation of the facility. So our primary mission is to remove all that, safely package that, and get that moved to a disposal facility in the lower 48 states. The primary reason that we went into safe store for such a long period of time was to ensure that the occupational safety of our work crews was maximized. So the primary driver from an occupational perspective is the cobalt-60 associated with the operation of the reactor. It has a very, very short half-life of 5 years and some change, and it has decayed away. So from an occupational perspective, that makes our dose during implementation significantly less and gives us greater ability to control that dose to our crew as we implement the project. As I've stated, this team has done 2 other reactors, and this will be our 3rd. So we're bringing all of our skill sets to this project, and we are prepared to implement this project with safety at the forefront. The table to the right just kind of, again, indicates that in your general everyday life, the general public does receive 620 millirem of dose annually based on your activities. And so what we are doing here in our release criteria, the red at the bottom, is 25 millirem. So significantly less than anything that we would encounter from our day-to-day activities. So just again, highlighting that this is going to be a very safe project and should have minimal to almost no impact from a radiological perspective on the community. I kind of talked through this earlier. This just illustrates again what we're concerned about is the cobalt-60. And as you can see from the purple line, it was extremely high at the time of initial shutdown. And by 2007, 2012, the cobalt-60 had decayed away. So from an occupational perspective, it makes it very safe for our teams to go in and implement the work. The other component that is of concern for us is the nickel 63. It is primarily associated with the long-term disposal, and that's what the disposal facilities are designed and implemented to manage in perpetuity. It will not decay away. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And so our efforts here are to remove that from the installation and remove this permanently from the site. So as I indicated earlier, that waste storage area isn't going to be in the blue hatched area on the upper right of this photo. We will then be transporting the waste when it leaves the installation out Robin Road, onto Big Delta Avenue, out the primary gate, and then onto the Richardson Highway. All of our wastes are properly packaged to comply with the Department of Transportation regulations. And the waste storage area will be a temporary but permanent area for us, in so much as it will be a concrete pad, and as I indicated, we'll have security, fencing, and remote security monitoring at all times. So our transportation route is very, very complicated for this particular project, and so I know this is a very busy slide, but the primary takeaway here is once we leave Fort Greely, we're going to go via over-the-road trucks into Fairbanks, at which point we will transload onto the Alaska Rail Line and go into either the Port of Whittier or Anchorage, depending on the size of the containers. It will go on to a barge that Linden operates, and it will be barged into the Port of Seattle, where it will be taken off the barge, put back on rail, and it will move via rail to Waste Control Specialists, which is our disposal facility located just outside of Andrews County, Texas. We were originally anticipating using both soft-sided bags and what we call an intermodal container, which you can see in the middle photo there. At this point, we've transitioned to using strictly hard-sided or intermodal containers, just because of this long transportation route and maintaining the integrity of our packaging as we move through this round trip. We're estimating this to take about 90 days for a container to leave and come back to us. So it is a very detailed logistics plan that we're going to have to work through as we implement the project. And so with that being said, all of our waste, both radiological and non-radiological, will be transported out of the state of Alaska for disposal. We have no intention of leaving anything other than maybe office waste here in the state of Alaska. And that's primarily due to the landfill regulations and the regulatory framework here in the state of Alaska. We will be shipping us by truck. We're anticipating 2 trucks weekly to leave here to go to Fairbanks, and then shipments out of the Port of Whittier. Again, right now our anticipation is 2 weekly shipments. And then as we move down into Seattle, depending on the service of the barge and when that timing is, we're hoping again to get twice weekly service. So we'll be monitoring this closely and making sure that all of our waste gets to the disposal facilities. Another key component of the project is tribal consultation. So as part of our environmental assessment, we did do an initial round of tribal consultation in June of 2020. And then in September of 2020, we actually hosted a tribal meeting where several tribes along the transportation route did come out and engaged with the project team. We started our second round of tribal engagement at this time, sent out another 103 letters just before we arrived in Alaska again this week. Now that we've defined our complete transportation route, and we're beginning to receive feedback from some of the tribes along the transportation route with respect to the project. So public involvement. As I indicated, we've got several stakeholders here for the project, our regulators, other government agencies, public interest groups, the property owner, the garrison, and obviously Doyen, the tribes, as we've discussed, and then federal and state officials. We are very committed to a very transparent communication approach with respect to this project. So we do have an active project website, and Fort Greely assists us in sharing our information here locally as well. And then I email a project update once a month to everyone on our stakeholder list, as well as post that on our project website. So if you want to sign for that and you're not already on it, we can get you signed up. And then another tool that we use is we use YouTube. So David Gray does a significant amount of videos for us that I will typically narrate. And we have our own YouTube channel. So you can see all of the videos from the sister site at SM-1 on how we removed components. And we just posted a video the other day of all of our work in the January timeframe. So you can see inside the vapor containment structure, and you can see what the team accomplished during that visit. So impacts to the local community. Obviously, we are going to be contributing to some of the truck traffic along the Richardson Highway. We are very cognizant of that. We understand that there's been increased traffic. We've seen it. We've driven it from the Kinross Gold Fleet. So we'll be very cognizant of that, and we will do our best to adjust our truck shipments to make sure that we're not further impacting the traffic on the roadway. We're working closely with the local community. We're going to be in Delta Junction on Monday to see what the community input is at this point. We will have opportunities for jobs. We do anticipate a crew size of up to 50 team members. So obviously multiple skilled crafts to complement all of our, scientific, technical folks. And then obviously all of our teams will be staying locally. So either rental properties, acquiring properties to live in, and or staying in local hotels. So we're hopeful that that's going to bring some revenue to the local area as well. And then we have partnered with several local contractors who are partnering with us on the project. Again, another influx of revenue to the community. Engagement, kind of talk through most of these. EPA Region 10, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Environmental Conservation within Alaska, and then obviously the State Historic Preservation Office with respect to any mitigation for the site. And that is all I have for this evening. So does anyone have any questions? Nothing? Nothing? Okay. So we do have, like I said, our YouTube. If you want to watch the YouTube videos, I think they're very informative. We've done a really good job of trying to use that as a tool to show people how we're working, what we're doing in the field, the safety precautions that go into place. And it really gives you a good picture of how the team and the crews operate. And then the project website is up and running, and then the team is always available. So I have 4 people on the ground right now who are duty stationed Fort Greely, and then the rest of us are actively traveling back and forth to keep both projects running. But they are here and available. I do hope to host one site tour before the project really kicks off, before we have any, impacts. And then we'll have to primarily count on YouTube videos and communications to keep everyone actively engaged.
I have a question. Just pretend I'm a congressional oversight committee. This project, from its inception all the way to its termination, looks like it's around 70 years.
70 years?
70.
Yes.
7 years. Okay, so we had 4 years, we did the planning, 4 years of construction, 10 years operational, 51 years decommissioning.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at $1950, and now you're looking at $2,024, how do you feel you're going to get support for this project in the future, or is this the end of the small nuclear portable units going out to remote areas.
So this is the last Army reactor under the original Army nuclear power plant program.
There's not going to be any more?
The new microreactor program is still in its inception, and the Army is developing that. The benefit of what we did when we implemented the decommissioning of the SM-1A was that information was fed back through our headquarters to Army to give them a life cycle completion cost of reactor build, operate, safe store maintenance, and then full decommissioning. So standards have changed significantly, and primarily standards changed after these reactors were shut down. So there were some massaging of that cost information, but it does help feed new programs that are potentially come online and provide support to the Army and other DoD agencies as microreactors become more readily implemented.
Technology is improving too, though.
Yes, significantly.
The second question I have is, you've got 3 wells that you say are going to be decommissioned.
Mhm.
Were those wells primarily to provide water for the steam, or were they wells for the whole facility?
Can you go to that slide?
Can we do without them, or do we need to re-drill new wells?
She's going to get
So I
there.
think it was 11, 12, and 13.
Yes. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. There you go. Oh, okay. So well 11 is interior. It was a water supply well. Well 12 and 13 did supply water at portions of the operation. Well 13 did turn into an injection well. So when the discharge to Jarvis Creek was ceased, we did consolidate waste, and then waste were injected into well 13. That is the reason that we're going to completely remove and remediate.
It really doesn't have anything to do with
Yeah,
the
and
facility.
Fort Greely has done comprehensive groundwater monitoring, as well as our team has done it. These wells don't impact anything from a groundwater perspective that's associated with the installation, and it won't have any impact on any water supply for the installation.
I have a comment.
Okay.
I think that probably the biggest pushback you might see from Delta Junction would be the issue about transportation and the amount of traffic on the highway. And they're also expecting to do some improvements in the highway is it this coming year?
This summer, yeah.
Summer? I think there's 18 places are going to have passing lanes, something like that. So you're going to have construction. You're going to have a lot more traffic on there because of the gold mine, and then you're talking about more
Trucks.
And I think you're going to have probably a little more reaction in the community about that.
Right. We understand, we're tracking the benefit of our current proposed schedule. We don't really anticipate starting to generate any waste until early 2025, which means that shipments from the installation really won't start until the April-May timeframe of next year. So hopefully repairs are completed. We can see how things are going from a traffic perspective with the mine. And then, as I said, we're going to do our very best to minimize our impact, but there is no other way to leave Fort Greely and get to Fairbanks. We've looked at that. We seriously considered looking at utilizing large cargo flights, and it's just not viable. But we did look at it, to be honest with you, because we knew that traffic and truck congestion along the road would be a problem. So we're going to do our very best, and it's just going to have to be something that we monitor and make adjustments to as we implement the project. All great questions. And speaking of the delegations, we did brief the delegations in February the 6th. And so they are very supportive. I think they're going to be in attendance in Delta and Fairbanks as well. So we actively coordinate with them and keep them apprised of our project.
One of the things that would be positive is, like I said, $1950, $2,024. There's a lot of money going into making sure this is a very safe and professional and forward-looking project. So I think that people can feel pretty good about that, because you're not like saying nickel and diming it. You know, we're going top drawer, We're gonna make sure everything's fine. And I think that'll be very easy for people to hear and believe, because you are putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, appreciate that feedback. And as I said, we've made some missteps on the other two reactors, nothing that resulted in safety impacts, but things that we definitely don't want to repeat. We cut through asbestos wiring because of old Army construction methods that we abated the outside of the wire, didn't realize they insulated the inside of the wire. So we've learned a lot of things along the way that we are going to be implementing here from the get-go.
So if you were speaking with just, I don't know, maybe kids at an elementary school, why are we doing this? Why now? What is the importance of this project? Sometimes it's just better to leave, things alone. So why is this happening right now today?
So as I indicated, we are self-regulated, but the Army doesn't have near the guidance that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has with respect to the commercial reactors within the United States. The primary driver is that within 60 years of initial deactivation of any commercial reactor site, they do have to be fully decommissioned. So we're adhering to that guidance. We've looked at, because the site is encased, one of the options that we did look at was going to a more permanent entombment and leaving the site as is. A couple of the concerns are the containment structure that houses the reactor components was never designed from a structural perspective for the earthquakes that you see here, or to move into a permanent entombment, it requires additional concrete and additional capping. And it's structurally not able to support that. The other big benefit from the Army's perspective, which helps the garrison, is this takes this liability away from the Army. We remove the radioactive constituents from this site, and now this portion of the site can be reused by Doyen, can be repurposed by the garrison, and there's no concern from a use perspective. So we're not leaving any land use controls or telling you that you can only use it for these activities and not these activities. And the cost to do this work has escalated significantly. And so we really want to remove this radioactivity from the site, get this cleaned up, and go on and hopefully support other Army initiatives.
Thank you.
Any other questions or feedback? All very positive. I definitely appreciate it. And I do know we got some feedback about Spanish translation, and we'll work on that next to make sure that our videos are captioned in English and Spanish. And if there's any other feedback that you guys have, we plan to stay. So if you want to talk one-on-one, we'll definitely be available after the meeting. All good? Okay. Thank you.